So in front of me here, I have a DSLR camera and an action camera, but these two cameras serve two different purposes and offer two very different types of people. So which ones would you choose? Well, in this video, we're going to dive into the world of DSLR cameras and action cameras so you know exactly which camera is best fit for you and what you want to shoot. So technology has come along in the last 10 or 15 years, and both these cameras are incredibly powerful and can shoot incredibly good photos and videos alike, but they're for two very different types of people. We've got the DSLR camera on one hand, which is a much bigger camera. Obviously, I've got a big lens on this as well right now. It serves a completely different purpose than a smaller action camera that literally just fits in your pocket. So a DSLR uses something called mirrorless technology, and without going into too much detail, it is a very high quality piece of kit and can produce some incredible photos and videos. Professional photographers, professional videographers swear by these, and this is probably one of their most used pieces of equipment in their kit bag. Our action camera, on the other hand, is very small. It can fit in your pocket, but at the same time, this is great for capturing things like sports and adventure videos, or taking a camera maybe where a DSLR just simply isn't possible to take. And even the weight of these two things, this is super lightweight, a couple of 100 grams, whereas this is almost getting on for a couple of kilos. So let's talk a bit about image quality of these two cameras. So image quality is obviously a massive factor when it comes to buying a camera and deciding which camera is right for you. The DSLR on one side of the coin is obviously super high quality just because of the amount of technology in this big piece of kit. If we look at image quality when it comes to low light situations, the fact that this camera has so many more options and adjustments on it is going to enable you to get a much broader range and broader scale of photos and videos, especially the fact that you can change the lenses. This is a super big 70 to 200mm lens, got a really wide range, but you can also get really wide angle lenses, just something you simply can't do with an action camera. You can't change the lens on an action camera to suit whatever you're shooting. If you buy this action camera, for instance, this is an Insta360, the lens is already built into the camera. Same with the GoPro, you can't just interchange lenses, although you can on some action cameras like the Insta360 One RS, where you can change it from a 4K camera to a 360 camera, which I think is quite cool. But as a general rule of thumb, action cameras come with one lens, and that enables you to shoot a wide range with one lens, but DSLRs obviously have a much bigger adjustment, just being able to change lenses. Let's talk a bit about portability and size of these things. Well, it's fairly obvious just by looking at these that they're two different pieces of kit. So obviously, action camera fits in your pocket. You don't really need much of a case to carry it in. I literally have a small sleeve that this camera goes in, and that just goes on the end of a selfie stick or attaches to my helmet on my chin for mountain biking, and that is it. I've got a super small travel case that this camera goes in with all the accessories I would need for a day of shooting. Super small, super versatile, really transportable. The DSLR, on the other hand, when you start getting more advanced, or if you choose to, with your photography or videography, you may want to get more lenses, different size SD cards, microphones, all different adapters for it, tripod stands. You may then obviously need a bigger backpack or carry case to carry all your gear in. And then obviously the weight of that becomes even more, and the portability is just a little bit more difficult, or more of a hassle, I should say, compared to this camera, which is literally just slide in your pocket and away you go. So what about durability of these cameras? Like, how strong and how rough are they? How much can they take? So I've been shooting mountain bike content using action cameras now for like 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer. And the reason I use action cameras is because they are so small and robust. That's the way they're designed. They're designed to be used for action sports as well as other things, but they're designed to be used with action sports because they are robust, small, and they can take a hit. For example, if you had a crash on a mountain bike, or you were shooting something outdoors and the camera's lens happened to fall on the floor, or the camera fell on the floor, you'd be fairly confident that the lens wouldn't be scratched and the camera would still function as normal and it wouldn't be damaged internally. Whereas the DSLR camera, I have a strong suspicion or feeling that if you drop this camera or you drop the lens, you'd have a very high chance of cracking the lens, damaging the lens, doing some internal damage to the mechanics inside here and inside the camera, which is then obviously going to affect the camera's usage. And I've seen cameras do this, especially in rough weather conditions. Like if it starts raining and you're on a shoot, you'll see people putting covers over cameras just to protect it from the elements. Action cameras are generally fairly waterproof, so you can use them for diving, you can use them for underwater stuff, or even rainy day activities where the weather is less than ideal. DSLRs on the other hand though, I'd be fairly cautious of that, and I probably would suspect if you dropped it, something would break. So what about versatility and use cases? So where would you use these cameras? You'll see a lot of professional videographers and photographers using DSLR cameras because of just their access to the quality of video and image that they need to shoot. For example, you wouldn't take an action camera to a wedding and shoot everything on an action camera. It just wouldn't be possible. Whereas the dynamic range on a DSLR, especially with a lens like this, I could stand so far away from the action of a wedding, but yet I could still capture all the emotions and feel like I was actually in the situations that you would want to capture on a camera and create these everlasting memories like you would do at a wedding. Whereas an action camera is, because it's such a wide lens, you have to be so close to get any kind of action going, which is fantastic for some things like action sports and fast-paced motorsports, things like that. But when it comes to, say, shooting sunsets, sunrises, dramatic landscapes, a DSLR is probably going to be your best bet. So what about these two cameras when it comes to ease of use and their setting up and actually using the camera? For the most part, action cameras come fairly standard and simple to use. You turn it on, you can literally shoot in an automatic setting, or you can get a little bit more advanced and play around with the manual settings to set your camera up for the shoot environment you're in. On the DSLR side of things, you would obviously expect this is going to be a much more of a manual process. There's going to be a bigger learning curve with a DSLR in general. Sure, you can shoot automatic on these cameras, but if you really want to get the absolute most out of what these cameras are capable of, you need to learn the fundamentals and principles of basic photography and videography, and that can obviously take time. But obviously once you do that, you open up a whole world of photography and videography to a level that an action camera simply cannot access. The learning curve on an action camera I think is a lot smaller, but again, it's a different tool for a different job. If you want to capture the most dynamic shots of action sports or motorsports, or even just documenting your travel and adventure vlogs, there is definitely a certain skill to doing that with these cameras. Like, you have to know how to position your camera to get the ideal shot, how to use your action camera in a way that creates dynamic videos and photos, whereas in some instances a DSLR is a little bit different and a little bit opposite to that. So what about the price of these cameras? How is this going to affect your bank balance if you decide to go ahead with any of these cameras? So just by looking at these cameras, you can probably tell the price difference just by looking at this and the weight of this versus an action camera. Now, by no means are action cameras cheap pieces of camera equipment, because this is nearly £500 for an Insta360X3 as of making this video. So they're not cheap by any means. They serve a certain purpose. But with a DSLR camera, you could probably get a DSLR camera for less than £500, like the actual body of the camera, and then you can buy lenses separately depending on what you want to shoot. DSLR photography, I think, has the option to go infinitely in one direction when it comes to price, because you can add whatever you want to your kit bag, more lenses, more accessories, whatever. Whereas an action camera, I'd probably argue that you can buy accessories and things for it, but it's never going to be as expensive as taking on photography and videography full-time with a DSLR camera. And then battery life, how does battery life fit into all this? Battery life is a very important part of this puzzle. You don't want to be running out of battery when you're about to grab one of the coolest shots, or you don't want to miss the shot. You don't want to run out of battery right before something epic is about to happen. When it comes to battery life on these two things, again, they're two different pieces of kit. They're both trying to harness a ton of power, trying to capture a lot of data. So yeah, both cameras do use a lot of battery life. This camera is a 360 camera, so it'll film everything. And if you're filming really long videos of mountain bike trails, or even time lapses of sunsets or sunrises, you're going to use more battery life, and the camera is going to get warmer, which is then it's going to have to use more battery life trying to cool the thing down. So it's always handy to carry spare batteries. I would recommend that. This camera, just to give you an idea of how long it lasts, is probably about an hour and 20 minutes, maybe an hour shooting 360 videos, maybe a little longer if you're just shooting on one lens. The DSLR camera, on the other hand, though, I think actually optimizes battery life a lot better. Again, it all comes down to what you're shooting. If you've got this camera turned on and shooting videos for a long length of time, it's obviously going to heat up faster and use more of your battery life. If you're shooting photographs and the camera is like automatically in sleep mode every 30 seconds or whatever, it's going to shoot and use less battery life altogether. I would always recommend carrying a spare battery for any camera that you decide to go with, but battery life is roughly around about an hour, maybe a bit less depending on what you're shooting. So which camera is best and which should you buy? DSLR or action camera? It all comes down to deciding what your main purpose is with these cameras. For me, I shoot a lot of action camera footage with my mountain biking, so it makes sense for me to focus on action cameras. Whereas if I was looking at taking professional photography up and wanting to go really deep down that rabbit hole, I probably would be strongly suggesting a DSLR camera as my primary shooting tool, and then maybe having an action camera as a spare in the box or something that's nice to have down the road. But it all just comes back to what you want to get out of your camera and what you ideally want to shoot. Because if somebody wants to take on professional photography, you won't go and choose an action camera as your primary tool to shoot that. It's just it's pointless basically. It's absolutely pointless. You want a DSLR camera, a tool that can complete the job, high quality, and get you the results you're looking for. So recommendations for both cameras, I've put some of those recommendations in the description as well. DSLR cameras, this is my Sony a7 III, and this has been my main shooting camera for 3 years now. I really like this camera and really do like the Sony interface on the camera. That's one thing I do like as well. If you decide to go with a certain brand of camera, generally how you actually use the camera and set it up in the interface is generally the same across all the cameras. So it's fairly easy to swap cameras and change depending on what you want to shoot. I've also shot on a Sony mirrorless camera, which has like got a flip screen on it. I actually can't remember the model name, but I'll put the link in the description if you're interested in that. You obviously got different types of Canon cameras, you've got Fuji cameras, there are and Nikon cameras as well. There's so many different cameras out there. It just comes down to testing out and trying them for yourself, going to a camera shop or having a friend that you can actually test and physically feel what these cameras are like. When it comes to action cameras, there's a couple that I would recommend. Obviously, I'm a very strong fan of Insta360 X3. This is my favorite 360 camera. It is an absolutely incredible piece of kit. The link will be in the description to that, where you can get a free bonus with one of these cameras. I've also used GoPro cameras before. I used to use GoPro cameras before I fully switched over to Insta360. Again, fantastic cameras, really simple to use, but yet you can get some really high quality videos. So hopefully this was useful to you and it's helped you make the buying decision easier, whether you should get a DSLR camera or an action camera. If you've got any questions about either of these cameras or these types of cameras, pop them in the comments below and I'll get back to you, and I'll even try and make a video to help you out further. Hope it was useful. See you in the next video.